Something happened in the Middle East that should have shattered every news cycle in America, and instead, it got folded into the noise and buried under the next day's headlines. Iranian ballistic missiles flew toward Israel. The alarms went off. Air defense batteries across the region spun up, and the most powerful military on Earth, with radar coverage from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, with destroyers positioned in the Red Sea and fighter wings, staged across 4 different countries, sat still and watched. America stepped aside. That is not conjecture. That is what multiple senior American intelligence officials and 3 separate major news organizations have reported, and it is the most consequential rupture in U.S.-Israel relations in the history of the modern alliance. We are talking about Washington deliberately standing down while an adversary launched a missile barrage against its closest strategic partner in the region. That does not happen. It has never happened before. Not under Reagan, when Hezbollah was blowing up American embassies, not under Bush during the Second Intifada, not under Obama, and not even under Biden, who had more public, televised, documented fights with Benjamin Netanyahu than any president in living memory, but who still, every single time, made sure American hardware was in the sky when Iranian missiles flew. Trump didn't. And if you want to understand what that means for Israel, for Iran, for every king and prime minister and militia commander sitting somewhere between the Gulf and the Mediterranean trying to recalculate their survival odds, and for ordinary Americans who are sick and tired of watching this country bleed treasure and credibility into conflicts that never end, then you need to lock in. Because this is the defining story of 2026, and it is being systematically undersold. If you are new to this channel, this is exactly what we do here. No talking points, no managed narrative, no sanitized version of events designed to protect powerful institutions from accountability. Hit subscribe right now, turn on notifications, share this video before you finish watching it, because the people around you need to hear what I am about to walk through, and they are not going to hear it anywhere else with this level of honesty. Let's start with the doctrine. Because before the phone calls, before the missiles, before the Pakistani diplomats quietly shuttling between Washington and Tehran, something fundamental shifted inside the Iranian government. And if you do not understand that shift, nothing else that follows makes sense. For 46 years, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979 remade the entire strategic map of the Middle East, Iran maintained a very specific posture toward its allies in the region. They funded Hezbollah in Lebanon, they armed Hamas in Gaza, they supplied the Houthis in Yemen, they built and sustained a network of proxy groups, militias, and political movements that stretched from Beirut to Baghdad to Sana'a, and they called it the axis of resistance. But through all of it, through 46 years of proxy wars and covert operations and surgical Israeli strikes on Iranian-backed forces, Iran always maintained a degree of formal separation. They were the patron, they were the weapons depot, they were the banker, but they never made it an official, stated binding commitment that an attack on Hezbollah was an attack on Iran. That was the line they would not cross until a man named Saeed Larijani crossed it, publicly, on record, in terms that left no room for interpretation. Larijani, the brother of the former National Security Advisor who was killed in an airstrike attributed to Israel, stood before the world and announced what he called a new Iranian strategic doctrine. Under this doctrine, any attack on any component of the axis of resistance will trigger a response from Iran that, in his explicit words, extends beyond geographical boundaries and reshapes regional equations. He stated that Iran will no longer wait for threats to fully materialize before acting to preserve its regional position. Read that twice. Iran is saying, you hit Hezbollah, we hit you. You bomb South Beirut, we come for you. You keep up the campaign in Lebanon. You are not fighting a Lebanese militia anymore. You are fighting Iran. That is not a rhetorical shift. That is a strategic transformation that took nearly 5 decades to arrive. And it arrived because Israel made a calculation that Iran would absorb indefinite punishment of its allies without formal escalation. And that calculation was wrong. The Israelis know what this declaration means. Their intelligence services know what it means. Their general staff knows. And yet within hours of the announcement, the Israeli military was already publicly promising to continue operations in Lebanon. Either they have decided Iran is bluffing or they are still gambling that American protection will materialize regardless of what Trump says. That second assumption just took a hit that cannot be walked back. The phone call. Let's talk about the phone call, because this is where American foreign policy crossed a threshold that history will record. According to reporting from CNN, NBC, and CBS News, all sourced to senior officials in both Washington and Jerusalem, Trump called Netanyahu and delivered a message that was blunt and unambiguous. If you strike Iran, if you escalate this, you are on your own. Not a suggestion, not a preference, an ultimatum. And when Netanyahu, under enormous domestic political pressure from his right flank, went ahead and struck anyway, because that is what Netanyahu does, because his political survival depends on projecting strength at all costs. The United States military did not activate its regional assets to intercept the Iranian retaliation. Let that sentence sit for a moment. American forces have intercepted Iranian missiles aimed at Israel before. They did it during previous rounds of escalation. They did it when Biden was publicly berating Netanyahu in front of cameras, because that was the commitment. That was the ironclad guarantee that undergirded the entire U.S.-Israel security relationship. Not the annual weapons packages, not the United Nations Security Council vetoes, but the knowledge that American radar and American interceptors would be between Israel and anything Iran launched. That guarantee was withheld. And the moment you withhold it once, the guarantee means something categorically different forever after, because Israel's entire strategic posture, its willingness to operate offensively across the region, to strike targets in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran itself, was built on the bedrock assumption that America would show up if things went sideways. Remove that assumption, even conditionally, even temporarily, and the foundation shifts. Every government in the region is running new calculations right now. The Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris, who notably stayed silent and stayed out of this entire episode, the Jordanians, even the Egyptians. They are all looking at what just happened and asking the same question. If Washington stepped aside for its most important regional ally, what does our relationship with Washington actually mean? That question is going to shake the next decade of Middle Eastern geopolitics, and most Americans have no idea it is even being asked. Now let's talk about what was actually happening underneath the theater of war, because if you look at the details of these strikes, really look at them, a pattern emerges that the cable news coverage did not adequately explain. Israeli sources told reporters that the targets selected inside Iran were deliberately chosen for their limited military significance, not the nuclear facilities that have been the subject of years of intelligence, assessments, and public debate, not the ballistic missile stockpiles, not the major command and control infrastructure. The strikes hit targets that, while technically inside Iran and technically damaging, were not strategically critical. And Iran's response, ballistic missiles in 4 missile waves, targeting Israeli air bases in the south, caused damage, caused fear, caused Israel to scramble its defenses, but did not attempt to maximize casualties or obliterate critical infrastructure. Both sides, in other words, hit things that made the strikes look serious to domestic audiences without triggering the kind of damage that would make a full-scale war politically unavoidable. This is what serious regional analysts are describing as calibrated theater, where the explosions are real and people are genuinely in danger. But the overall choreography is managed by both parties in communication with each other, directly or through intermediaries. And the primary intermediary is Pakistan. Pakistani officials operating at the highest diplomatic levels with the full knowledge and strategic support of China. have been running back-channel communications between Washington and Tehran. The Pakistanis are reportedly working toward what they are calling the Islamabad Accords, a formal agreement, possibly with Trump and Iranian leadership signing publicly side by side. Now here's where a serious journalist has to ask the question nobody on television seems willing to ask. If this agreement is not submitted to the United States Senate and ratified as a formal treaty, what is it legally worth? An executive agreement between Trump and Iran is a piece of paper. The next administration can tear it up on inauguration morning without a single procedural step. Iran has watched America walk away from international agreements before. Trump himself tore up the JCPOA in 2018, and the JCPOA had far more institutional support than anything being discussed in Islamabad. So Iran's leadership must be asking internally why they would bind themselves to commitments that have no institutional backing in Washington. The answer, apparently, is that Iran wants normalization more than it wants guarantees. They want the sanctions architecture dismantled. They want to be able to trade with the world. And the calculation is that even an imperfect, fragile deal with Trump buys them time and space. But the contradiction at the heart of all of this has not been resolved. Iran just formally declared it will defend the Palestinians and Lebanese by force, and simultaneously it is negotiating a deal with the country funding the military that is killing Palestinians and Lebanese. That contradiction cannot be papered over forever. Which brings me to the thing that is most morally inexcusable about the last several weeks, and the thing that has received the least amount of attention in proportion to its severity. While diplomats were talking, while missiles were flying, while the world was locked onto the spectacle of Iran versus Israel, the Israeli government reimposed a blockade on humanitarian aid into Gaza. The official explanation, and I want you to really let this land, was that the Iranian missile strikes required, quote, security measures and precautionary steps to protect personnel amid the escalation. That is the explanation offered by a government for cutting off food and medicine to 2 million people, the majority of whom are children, who had absolutely nothing to do with Iranian missiles, who had no hand in this conflict except as its victims, who have been living under conditions that international humanitarian organizations have documented as meeting the threshold for famine. And Israel's response to a geopolitical escalation it provoked was to make those people's lives worse, not as an unfortunate side effect, as a stated policy. And the response from the governments of the free world was silence. Not one major Western leader issued an urgent public demand for the blockade to be lifted. Not one prime minister went on live television and said, "This is collective punishment. This is a war crime. This stops today." The silence is not an accident and it is not an oversight. It is a choice made deliberately by governments that have decided the relationship with Israel is worth more than the lives of the people being starved. Now, into this moral vacuum steps Iran's reported demand. Any ceasefire agreement between Iran and the United States must include a full ceasefire in Gaza as a condition. If that reporting is accurate, and Hamas's political spokesperson stated it publicly, though Iran has not yet made it an official diplomatic position, then it is one of the most significant developments in this entire story. It means Iran is attempting to use the leverage it has earned through military capability and strategic positioning to extract something real for the Palestinian people. Whether that demand survives the negotiation process, whether Washington and Tel Aviv will ever allow it to become a binding condition, is a separate question. Netanyahu will not voluntarily stop what he is doing in Gaza. His political survival depends on it continuing, but the fact that the demand is on the table means the diplomatic terrain is shifted in ways that would have seemed unthinkable even 12 months ago, and the rest of the axis is not standing still, waiting for diplomats to finish talking. The Houthis have closed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to Israeli-linked shipping again, and they are not making polite gestures about it. They are using FPV drones with night vision capability. They have demonstrated the ability to penetrate Israeli air defenses, and they struck 2 Israeli vessels in the Red Sea in real-time while this diplomatic drama was unfolding. Meanwhile, IRGC drone strikes hit American military positions in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. Multiple interceptions were reported by U.S. defense systems. On the surface, this looks contradictory. Why would Iran strike American bases while simultaneously pursuing a historic diplomatic agreement with Washington? The answer requires understanding how Iran is running two tracks simultaneously. The covert track, the CIA assets arming Kurdish paramilitary groups to conduct destabilization operations inside Iran. The sabotage networks, the assassination infrastructure that has been targeting Iranian scientists and military officials. For years, that track has not been suspended because diplomats are talking. Iran's strikes in Iraqi Kurdistan are a direct message to the American intelligence community. Stop running covert operations inside our borders, or we will make the cost of doing so impossible to hide from the American public. It is sophisticated dual-track statecraft. Negotiate on the formal level. Hold the line on the covert level. Apply calibrated pressure where you can without blowing up the diplomatic track. And the broader message to the region is equally deliberate. Iran is demonstrating to every member of the axis of resistance, to Hezbollah, to the Iraqi militias, to the Houthis, that it is still present, still committed, still dangerous, even as it sits at the negotiating table. That combination, diplomatic engagement, plus continued military posturing, is not the behavior of a government desperate for a deal. That is the behavior of a government that believes it is negotiating from strength. And based on the evidence of the last several weeks, that belief is not without foundation. So let's come to the final question, because it is the one that matters most for what happens next and for what it means for this country. Who has the power here, and who is going to win? There was a quote that came out of a conversation between a senior U.S. official and reporters at Axios that cut through 40 layers of diplomatic language with surgical clarity. The quote went like this: Benjamin Netanyahu needs the war to continue to stay politically alive in Israel. Donald Trump needs the war to end, to stay politically alive in the United States. That is the entire equation. Netanyahu is a man on trial facing corruption charges that could send him to prison. His governing coalition is held together by far-right partners who want permanent Israeli occupation of Gaza and the expulsion of the Palestinian population. The moment a genuine ceasefire takes hold, the moment the guns go quiet across Lebanon and Gaza, the political conversation in Israel pivots immediately to October 7, to the intelligence failures, to the hostages, to the corruption indictments, to the question of what kind of leader allows everything that has happened on his watch. Netanyahu needs the war the way a man drowning in the ocean needs something to hold on to. Trump, on the other hand, needs to show his base that he is the deal maker, that he ended something, that he got America out of another Middle Eastern catastrophe that was draining American credibility and American money. His voters did not put him back in the White House to fight Iran's wars for Israel. His voters are watching the price of groceries and wondering why Washington keeps spending on foreign conflicts while American infrastructure crumbles. Trump knows this, his team knows this, and his actions, not his social media posts, not his rally rhetoric, his actual military decisions reflect his calculation. He pulled American missile defense from Israeli airspace. That is not a small diplomatic signal. That is a statement in the language of raw power, delivered in a language Netanyahu cannot spin or dismiss or explain away. To his generals, the neoconservative establishment in Washington is in genuine panic over this. The pro-Israel lobbying apparatus is sending emergency communications. Media figures who have spent their careers building the political infrastructure that makes unconditional American support for Israeli military operations untouchable are watching that infrastructure crack. They are terrified because they built it over 3 decades, and they do not know how to stop what is coming. Here's what I want to leave you with. The United States is more politically polarized right now than at any point since the Civil War. That is not a talking point. That is the documented conclusion of political scientists who study institutional cohesion and democratic fracture. But the polarization is not the disease. It is the symptom. The disease is a government that has been captured by defense contractors with a financial stake in perpetual conflict, by foreign lobbying interests that have shaped American foreign policy away from American interests, by an intelligence and diplomatic establishment that made careers and built institutions around commitments that have cost this country enormously and delivered diminishing returns. The reason this moment matters: the Iran doctrine, the Trump-Netanyahu rupture, the Pakistan back channel, the Gaza blockade, is that for the first time in a long time, the political incentives inside the White House are pushing against that capture rather than deeper into it. Not for noble reasons, not because anyone in Washington suddenly grew a conscience about Palestinian children, but because the electoral math, for once, points in the same direction as the national interest. That alignment is fragile. It could collapse tomorrow. A miscalculation could spiral. An IRGC strike could kill Americans and force Trump's hand. Netanyahu could pull something that changes the entire dynamic overnight. But right now, in this specific moment, the equation has shifted in ways that have not been seen in this region in a generation. Pay attention, because the story is not over. It is just beginning. If this analysis cut through the noise for you, if this is the kind of coverage you've been searching for and not finding anywhere else, do something about it right now. Subscribe. Share this video with someone who deserves to know what is actually happening. Drop a comment and tell me whether you think the Islamabad Accords are real or another round of managed theater. This channel exists because people refuse to accept the curated version of reality that powerful institutions hand them. Stay engaged, stay critical, stay informed, because the decisions being made right now in Washington, Tehran, Tel Aviv, and Islamabad are going to shape the world your children inherit, and you deserve to understand exactly what is at stake